You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 21st of May, 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up, we'll look at the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. Health authorities being hampered by a long-running conflict in the region. Could this allow warring parties to see some sense? After that,
Romanian F-16s downed a drone over Estonia. This was a Ukrainian drone, but it wouldn't have been there but for Russia's aggression.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte there detailing something that has happened with increasing frequency in recent weeks. Ukrainian drones in Baltic territory. We'll explain why. We've also got the newspapers and we'll explore how a strike at the South Korean tech giant Samsung has been called off at the 11th hour. And then,
with PPJ we can mix together the Brazilian softness and beauty of Paula's voice with the club music. It goes really well together.
The Franco-Brazilian duo PPJ there. We'll also get aviation news out of Asia. And finally, we'll check in with our fashion director, Natalie Theodosi, about why Chanel is benefiting from what's being called Blasi Mania. That's all up ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Iran says it is reviewing a new U.S. proposal it received to end the war between the two countries. The United Nations General Assembly has reaffirmed countries' responsibility to confront climate change. And SpaceX has filed for an initial public offering targeting a record valuation of $1.75 trillion. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, if there was to be an attack by Russia on a NATO country, it would almost certainly be on one of the Baltic nations, among NATO's newest members and those countries most conscious of the threat posed by Russia based on their own histories. Well, this week that threat has felt a little bit closer, with fears that the Baltic nations could be drawn further into Russia's war with Ukraine. Stray drones from Ukraine have been shot down over Estonia, forced leaders in Lithuania to take cover, while Latvia's prime minister last week resigned over the issue, and Moscow has accused Latvia of planning to allow Ukraine to send drones into Russia from its territory, a charge that Latvia denies. Well, I'm joined for more on all of this from Riga by Ugis Libietis, associate researcher at Latvian Institute of International Affairs and a journalist at Latvian Radio, and by Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov. Ugis, I wanted to start with you, if you could take us back to last week. Tell us about some of the drone incidents Latvia has faced and why it prompted the Prime Minister to resign.
Yes, well, at first, I would say that for last already 2 weeks, we are experiencing drone overflights or kind of drone overflights over our territory. And the question has always been, how does it come that those drones are being able to travel quite far inside our territory without being shot down? So the discussion was, of course, about should the armed forces shoot down any kind of drones using most probably quite expensive technologies and ammunition, or should we just inform society about the potential threat? When two of the drones fell down and they hit one of the fuel tanks in one of the towns near the close to the Russian border, that was, I would say, one of the reasons why discussions about the stability of government started. And there was a tricky situation because Minister of Defense wanted kind of to resign himself. Just 10 minutes before his announcement, the Prime Minister announced that she's firing him. So at the end, after different discussions, the government fell. I wouldn't say that this security issue is the only reason why this government fell. It was, I would say, quite unpopular for many years already. It was its coalition partner where the Minister of Defense was coming from, the progressives. They were very unpopular, I would say, outside Riga, and the Minister of Defense was widely blamed for inability of Latvian armed forces to defend our country. So this all has led to quite a big, fast process of creating of new governments. We are now in the process of agreeing of new coalition, which will consist of two political parties from the previous government and two political parties from the opposition. Just this morning, I got the news that most probably the vote for the new government will be already next Thursday. And this is the kind of a very interesting development currently that we are experiencing.
Lots of things taking place politically in Latvia. And Petri, to bring you in on this, I mean, interesting that Ugis was describing this dilemma that Latvia has had about how to respond to the drone incursions. Meanwhile, in Estonia, drones have actually been shot down for the first time to Ukrainian drones by Romanian F-16s.
So yes, that's correct. These were basically Romanian F-16s that were stationed in Lithuania, and they were scrambled to intercept this drone. The Estonian officials stated that it was basically just the fastest way. I mean, obviously they have Nato aircraft also stationed in Estonia in the Amuri air base, but they stated it was faster to use the ones from Lithuania, and quite a consequential, quite a historic moment in the sense that this is the first time that NATO actually shoots down drones in its territory that it conceives as a threat. And the reason, this was given by the Estonian authorities, the reason for shooting down this particular drone was because it was headed into a populated area. Mind you, this is in central Estonia. You know, it was not headed to Tallinn, but it still fell just a few hundred meters from a nearest house. It didn't cause any harm, and it was quite interesting watching Estonian and Finnish TV. You know, they sent journalists to the site, and they were able to pick up pieces of this drone that was shot down. But yeah, interesting reaction by Estonia, because we've seen similar developments happen in Finland as well in the past weeks and months, and Finland has opted not to shoot the drones down.
So there is this dilemma in Finland as well. And Petri, just to stay with you on this, I mean, Ukraine has said that these drones entering Baltic airspace, striking the Baltic nations, is the result of Russian electronic warfare. We heard that a bit from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the top of the show as well. What are the Baltics saying about that?
Yeah, this is basically what all the military officials, security officials, politicians from all the Baltic countries, and also from Finland are saying, because we are used to. I'm based in Helsinki. We are used to Russian electronic signal interference that affects civilian aircraft, civilian vessels in the Baltic Sea. So it's very likely that Russian interference, electronic interference, is also behind these stray drones. Because let's remember, these are very far from Ukraine. They are not there's not some guy sitting in a bunker and remote controlling them. These are autonomous drones and susceptible to this kind of interference. And while I cannot state it as a fact, these are just claims made by the authorities. But we just have to bear in mind that this is straight out of Russia's playbook to create this sort of fear and ambiguity. Who is behind it? Blaming the other part. Because in my opinion, in my of course subjective opinion, what would Ukraine stand to benefit from its drones forming a threat to some of its staunchest allies, which are the Baltic countries? So it's the least. It's very likely that Russian interference is behind it.
It would appear to be in the Russian playbook. And Ugis, to bring you in on this, because there's another aspect of the Russian playbook playing out right now, which is these accusations that Latvia will actually allow Ukrainian drones to strike Russia from within its territory. Latvia has, of course, denied this, but just tell us what that feels like for Latvians. Are there fears that this is Russia maybe even laying the groundwork for an attack?
I have to admit that many people I know, including my wife as well, has asked me about what does it mean? What does it mean that this rhetoric is increasing? And should it mean that some forceful actions might follow? I will definitely agree with Petri that this is one of the playbook elements. And the idea of Russia, they don't need necessarily to make a direct attack. And if you will follow the different incidents around the world where Russia has been involved, their idea is not to attack directly, but probably just to make an impression that you are not trusted, Ukraine is not trusted, it should not be supported. You have weak spots, you can't trust your government is unstable, NATO is not a trusted organization, European Union is not behind you, so you start to doubt about everything. And that means that in this case you are not capable of doing things. And also this governmental crisis, in this case we have nobody to kind of keep responsible for everything what happens right now. So we are in a big turmoil ourselves. So Russia is using those weak spots and provoking this uncertainty and everything around it. So it's like we basically do the harm to ourselves, not they are doing it to us. And we kind of know this trend for years, but the people are human beings and they just really fear for their own security and for safety of their children, and that's only natural that we are afraid at some point. But all these incidents have also showed that we need to be more prepared, that we have to rethink our algorithms of actions, how we warn the society, how we inform them, and we have already discovered that there are some slight problems that has to be changed, and armed forces with crisis management center, they are already redoing and replanning those algorithms. So I think that all these things, they still make us a little bit stronger and more resistant to any further provocations.
Ugis Libietas, journalist at Latvia's Radio, and Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov. Thank you both for joining us very much. This is The Globalist. Now, an outbreak of Ebola has been spreading across the Democratic Republic of Congo in the past week, killing more than 100 people, prompting the World Health Organization to declare a global emergency. Now, if that weren't bad enough, the outbreak is in a conflict region, both in the Congo and in Uganda, where the virus has spread and where Ugandan forces have been battling ISIS militants. So how is the conflict hampering efforts to contain the outbreak? Well, I'm joined now from the Ugandan capital, Kampala, by Nicholas Barrio, reporter for the Wall Street Journal's Africa Bureau, covering East Africa and the Great Lakes region. Nicholas, great to have you on the show. Perhaps we could start with some of the background here, because this was such a dangerous part of the world with conflict before Ebola even arrived on the scene.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me over. Yeah, that's really correct, because the outbreak is in a very, very rare honor. In one area, the province of Ituri is rebel-infested, still under government control, but with a lot of armed groups, including ISIS-affiliated fighters. In the other corner, North Kivu and South Kivu are largely under the control of a Rwandan-backed militia called M23. So it's really difficult.
And tell us how then that what you're describing there, the conflict, the different regions controlled by different groups, how has that hampered efforts to contain the outbreak of Ebola?
For starters, in North Kivu province, the largest city, which is called Goma, is under the control of rebels, and the main airport is closed. So no aid deliveries can be delivered via Goma Airport, which has over the years been a hub for humanitarian deliveries. And in the other part of Ituri, because of the insecurity, aid officials have to think about how to navigate rebel-infested highways and dirt roads to enter affected villages. So it's really very difficult in terms of access for the people who are responding and trying to contain this outbreak.
It is very difficult, as you describe. Are you able to say at this point just how bad the outbreak is, and also what we understand now about how it started and where?
This is really bad because by the time health officials think that this actually started saturating around March, and the alarm was raised around April when the death toll picked up so much, but then the confirmation came in May. So there is a lot of gap between when the infection started saturating and when this was confirmed. So that poses rather a big challenge. In previous outbreaks, the cases would be detected when they are still in their dozens. This time, by the time an official confirmation came, cases had surpassed more than 200. So it's really scary.
That is obviously very scary. And is the fact that now this outbreak is spreading, I mean, is that recognized at all by government forces, by the rebels? Because at the end of the day, surely they also have some interest in allowing access to health authorities, granting them access where needed.
Yeah, that is actually surprisingly that has happened, because in Goma, for instance, the airport is still closed, but the rebel forces are allowing health officials to pick these samples and sending them to a government-controlled lab. So that is the small positive of it. But in other areas, because these rebels are so many, the groups are multiple, and they are not under a central command, so it's hard to know whether one side has accepted this or this. And so that's the challenge. The groups are multiple and not under one command.
Well, and what has the World Health Organization said about this? What needs to happen in order to contain the virus? Is there something that the international community can do to try and improve the situation on the ground?
Yes. At the moment, the World Health Organization has been relying on peacekeepers, United Nations peacekeepers who are deployed in Eastern Congo to airdrop some of these deliveries, or actually transport some of things like emergency tents, beds, and construction of field hospitals from hubs in Kinshasa, some from Nairobi. So at the moment, the United Nations peacekeepers have stepped in, and they've also been calling upon these armed groups to tone down. So the conflict, in a way, is not at its peak, but the place remains insecure.
You mentioned there Kinshasa, Nairobi involved with hospitals as well. Just tell us about how the neighbors of Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo are responding. Are they helping in this situation? But there will also no doubt be worry from the neighbors about the spread of this virus. Is there a prospect of, closing borders? Is that even possible?
Yes, so for the case of Nairobi and Kinshasa, I think that's where the WHO has staged facilities to bring in this surprise. And then for the neighbors, we have a situation with Rwanda. Rwanda has closed most of the border crossings along its border with Congo to try and prevent movement. But then that also causes another problem whereby it's hard for humanitarian workers to move in and out. And that Congolese officials say will inevitably slow down response. And for the part of the border with Uganda, they've deployed a lot of surveillance teams, health teams, but they also have to be guarded by troops because of the insecurity.
Just finally then, Nicholas, I mean, what does all this mean for where you are and how quickly Ebola could spread? I mean, where can it be stopped, if not easily in these conflict regions?
I think the biggest risk here is in the conflict-stricken areas of Eastern Congo because of what I mentioned earlier. Accessibility is very complicated because of insecurity. Yes, there is also a lot of cross-border movements between Uganda and Congo. This hasn't been restricted yet, although some functions, there was a very large impending religious pilgrim ceremony in Uganda. This has been put on hold. So the risks are there, but I think the risks are higher inside the DRC.
Nicholas Barrio, Kampala-based reporter for the Wall Street Journal's Africa Bureau. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, let's continue with today's newspapers now. Joining me for that right here in the studio is Nina Dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent, former CNN Europe editor. Nina, good to have you.
Good morning. Hi.
Good morning. The sun is arriving in London. Are we feeling good? The weekend is looking good here.
I'm afraid I don't have an update on that because it was still cloudy 5 minutes ago when I walked through the door. But it promises to be sunny later on this afternoon. So, as long as it's in the double digits, I'm fine with that. Sun or no sun. At least there's no rain.
At least there's no rain at the moment. That is a positive after the spring we've had. Nina, we have a couple of trade stories to start us off with. Different trade stories. We'll start with the United States and the European Union. This has been an ongoing spat, but there has been movement.
Yeah, I was talking about the weather. One takes their small victories. Let's start out with the big victory at this point. From the EU has finally agreed among itself to press ahead with its trade deal that you remember Ursula von der Leyen struck with Donald Trump when she had to, shock horror, venture outside of the EU's borders because, of course, the UK has now Brexited and visit him in his private golf resort in Turnberry in Scotland. They struck that deal after the US imposed really punitive sanctions, trading sanctions, let's say, tariffs on EU goods. This is one of the most significant trading relationships in the world, worth about 1.8 trillion. And so each side had a lot to lose, despite the fact that the US Supreme Court actually ruled that Donald Trump's imposition of those tariffs was illegal. The EU is still extremely nervous about missing a deadline on July the 4th, by which time Donald Trump said that this trade deal should be ratified. Otherwise, these kind of tariffs could come back on the table. Well, among the EU, what they've done is they've sort of pressed ahead with this. And that means that members of the European Parliament have now agreed that they will probably vote it through on about the 16th to 17th of June when they come up for this. But, one big sigh of relief probably for the EU as top honchos at the European Commission, because these European parliamentarians had twice kicked this back because, of course, Donald Trump has made all those threats about seizing Greenland, which is, part of European territory because it's part of a sort of semi-autonomous part of Denmark.
Well, he's talked about seizing Greenland, which prompted the EU lawmakers to get involved, but also, of course, just the sort of lack of reliability from Donald Trump. He changes his threats on tariffs. And even just the principle of this has been quite controversial, hasn't it? Agreeing a trade deal that essentially reduces tariffs from the European Union to the US, but keeps a certain amount of tariffs in place from the US to Europe.
Yes, and what they've also done to reflect that is that they've kept a couple of clauses in there, like a sunset clause, which means that if the EU feels that the US isn't holding upholding its side of the relationship. They can end this deal by 2028, and that they can also reimpose their own tariffs on some emotive products, like, for instance, motorbikes from the United States. So they have kept a couple of little get-out-of-jail-free clauses inside there, but the reality is that this is one of the biggest trading relationships in the world. Everybody's suffering economically as a result of the Iran war, and that's probably focused minds quite a lot. Not least the fact that the United States has also had a big visit with China recently.
Well, of course, and we've been talking about that on this show, but sticking with, in a way, the Iran war, or somewhat related to that, because there's been a Gulf trade deal between Gulf states and the UK.
Yes, that's right. This is a bit of a win, actually, for Sir Keir Starmer's government on the foreign policy and economic side at a time when, boy, does he need it domestically. It means that this is the first trade deal that has been struck by a G7 country and the GCC states. So the UK has struck this trade deal with a group of 6 Gulf states. The UK says it's going to be worth about £3.7 billion to the UK economy, which isn't small change at a time like this when one really needs it. It will particularly benefit the UK services industry. And also it's, to a certain extent, a big win for Gulf states at a time when obviously these are countries that have really suffered, particularly their economic diversification plans have suffered recently as a result of, lots of expats who had gone there, moved there, sometimes for tax reasons or just bigger opportunities from the UK, and are now sort of concerned that the security dynamic might not be to their liking. This is a big win for both sides in terms of sort of the PR optics as well, I think. A
big win for both sides. How much credit do we expect UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to get for this?
Probably not a huge amount on the streets of Makerfield, which is where the next by-election is coming from. And obviously the person who, from the Labour Party, could challenge him for the premiership, Andy Burnham, if he wins, that's a problem for Keir Starmer. But at the same time, Keir Starmer also has to show face in the sense of saying, well, I want the Labour Party to win this and not the challengers from the right of reform. And you can bet that these big types of trade deals are exactly the type of thing that don't necessarily go down, are not always in the forefront of voters' minds in local by-elections. Let's just put it that way.
Let's put it that way. For now, we'll certainly have more on that in the coming weeks. But let's turn to the Chelsea Flower Show. This is a crazy story, or interesting, from the New York Times, because there is what they're calling in their headline, a sexy garden at the Chelsea Flower Show.
Yes, that's right. Now, if you're getting hot under the collar about the fact that for a second year in a row, I think gnomes have not been banned in the confines of the Chelsea Flower Show, which I think was actually the story at the start of the week when the Royals paid their inaugural visit to this annual flower show, which is such an institution in the UK. It also takes place for those listeners we have out there who aren't Londoners. I'm a born and bred Londoner, and they don't know London. What you should probably know about London is that Chelsea is probably the stuffiest, richest, oldest part of the capital, and as a result it's quite socially conservative. But a company called Love Honey, which makes, let's just call them intimate toys.
We're treading lightly for our conservative Chelsea
just wait,
listeners.
I haven't got to the floral arrangements yet, Chris. It has decided to sponsor what it calls Aphrodite's Hothouse. So it's inspired by Aphrodite and Eros, the gods of love and passion. And I've got to read you part of its press release, because this has been so successfully marketed. It ended up not just, as you said, in the New York Times, but also in the Times of London, which is, I thought, well, I'm going to have to cover it even on Monocle Radio, even if it's quite early in the morning. Here's part of the press release. The studio, conceived as the ultimate pleasure garden, this boundary-pushing hothouse is lush, fragrant, and just a little bit naughty. Visitors are invited to step inside and wander through the tunnel of love, which is dripping with sultry orchids, glistening anthurium, pendulous nepenthes, wandering vines that coil and entwine with knowing intent. Now take that, the fine folks in their leather suits, linen suits. Probably some of them will be in leather suits. I'm wearing a leather jacket, actually. I think that's what's inspiring me. But I suppose it's just, it speaks to the typical sort of no sex, please wear British sort of attitude. And they've taken a really funny twist on it. And I suppose the more serious point I'm trying to make here is that the Chelsea Flower Show has become this sort of big cultural and economic juggernaut.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't in my time when I was young. It was, considered sort of, the preserve of daytime TV, dare I say, with older people who garden and were passionate about it. But now they're passionate for other reasons.
Well, with these changes, we might have to send our own Fernando Augusto Pacheco down there. I'm sure he'd love
his Instagram feed would deliver endless dividends, I'm sure.
One final story that I'm also interested in because I have a personal relation to this final one, Nina. But tell us, first of all, there is
You can't leave that sentence hanging up to what we
Cows can recognize the faces of people they know. I am a testament to this. As a 6-year-old, I had 2 cows that I would visit on my way back home, and they'd always come straight to the fences as soon as I arrived with my parents.
Where was that?
This was in Brussels, actually, yes.
There were cows in Brussels?
There were cows in Brussels. There were just 2 in a field, and they would always show up. Every time they would just come running to the fence. So clearly they recognized me.
Did they have a conversation with you about the common agricultural?
I don't think so, but tell us what this study has found.
Well, first of all, the Times, full credit for their headline writer on this one, déjà vu. They found that cows can recognise the faces of people they know. Well, to you, that's no surprise.
That's no news, exactly.
I'm a biologist by degree, actually. So to be honest with you, this seems like, the sort of standard thing you'd learn in animal behaviour, but it hadn't actually been proven to this extent by scientists before. So scientists took some Holstein cows, and what they did was, and if you look at the pictures of this article, it's quite funny because you've got this rather stoic, enormous Holstein cow staring at pictures on a projector screen of different faces, a bit like a sort of identikit, like a lineup that you'd find in sort of police stations. And what they found was that cows looked at faces of people they didn't recognise for longer than faces that they'd seen before. And then if you amplified that by adding the sound of a new person, they'd be even more interested. I do remember over the years that there's been all sorts of quirky studies about cows. About 10 years ago, I remember that British cows were found to understand regional accents differently. It was the Brummie accent near Birmingham, which actually, if anybody knows the UK, will know that is actually quite strong, that solicited the strongest response in British cows about 10 years ago. And just last year, we found that a Swiss cow called Veronica was seen to use a broom to scratch parts of her hindquarters that she couldn't reach before. And that was viewed as, the first time that a cow had been observed using tools. So, déjà vu, there you go.
Who knew there were so many studies about cows?
It's not all black and white, put it that way.
Nina dos Santos, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. You're with The Globalist on Monocle Radio, and still to come in the program. Those notifications from Samsung will continue uninterrupted as the South Korean government has helped avert a strike at the company. We'll have the latest. Now here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Iran says it is reviewing a new U.S. proposal it received to end the war between the two countries. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's willing to wait a few days for the, quote, right answers from Tehran. The United Nations General Assembly has reaffirmed countries' responsibility to confront climate change, backing a ruling by the International Court of Justice last year that found it was unlawful for countries to neglect their climate commitments. 8 countries opposed the measure, including the United States. SpaceX has filed for an initial public offering, or IPO, targeting a record valuation of $1.75 trillion. The filing shows that SpaceX is not currently profitable due to massive investments in AI to secure it for the future. And Germany has arrested a married couple it alleges acted as Chinese spies. The couple worked for car companies and ingratiated themselves to technical schools and universities even inviting professors to give talks in China that will have been attended by military officials. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Well, it is 15:31 in Seoul, 8:31 in Zurich. Now, today was meant to be the day that some 48,000 workers across South Korea went on strike. But at the last minute, it does appear a deal has been reached between unions and the South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics. The company has seen profits surge amid booming demand for AI semiconductors, and workers have been demanding a piece of the action. Samsung Group accounts for an incredible 1/5 of South Korea's economic output, and it plays a massive role in global semiconductor supply chains, which does explain why the South Korean government was involved in brokering the deal. Well, I'm joined now by Nemo Kim, journalist in Seoul, specializing in Asian issues. Nemo, it's great to have you on the show. This strike, as we understand, was about bonuses because Samsung has become so incredibly profitable. So tell us how that's come about.
Right. The Samsung Union wanted a more stable and generous performance bonus system, especially as the AI chip market drives demand at the moment. And the tentative deal fixes more than 10% of business performance as bonus funding, creating this possibility of very large payouts for semiconductor workers if the division performs strongly. And under this tentative agreement, as I mentioned, 10% of business performance. So for employees in the device solutions or DS division, this creates a basis for very large bonuses. Their annual salary of 100 million won could potentially receive up to 600 million won or $400,000 US in performance bonuses if the relevant performance conditions are met.
Well, that is a large number, but again, shows just how profitable Samsung has become. I understand that the sticking point, or part of the sticking point in this conversation with unions around bonuses was whether to give bonuses also to those divisions that are not doing as well in Samsung.
That's right. And the AI boom is not lifting every Samsung workers in the same way. So it has been creating divisions because the biggest gains are concentrated, as you can imagine, in Samsung's semiconductor business. As I mentioned, the DS division, the device solutions division, basically the semiconductor chip business area covering areas such as memory chips, system semiconductors, and advanced packaging. So workers in that part of the company are much closer to the profits generated by AI demand, whereas employees in other divisions may not benefit in the same way.
So there won't be a benefit all the way across the company, but just tell us about the impact you expect this might have. I mean, shares in Samsung, I understand, rose nearly 8% as this strike was averted. As early as yesterday, we still expected the strike to go forward. But are there any concerns now that a deal has been reached? How might this affect Samsung's future profitability, viability, that kind of thing?
Right. Well, if the strike had gone ahead, and as I mentioned, the strike has just been the more precise wording I meant would be that the strike was suspended, not permanently called off. So Samsung Electronics and the unions reached a very dramatic tentative agreement. And if it had gone ahead, there would have been massive impact all across the board on the entirety of South Korean economy, as well as global semiconductor supply chains. It would not have been just a Samsung issue. Samsung is central, of course, to South Korea's economy and to the global memory chip supply chain, and the impact could have been very significant. Samsung is one of the country's most important companies, as well as a key global supplier of memory chips, and a major strike there would not only have affected the company, it would have disrupted South Korea's export economy and added a lot of pressure to global semiconductor supply chains, especially at a time when demand for AI-related chips is extremely high, and which is why the government stepped in so actively before the strike began. and the planned strike was not treated merely as an ordinary company dispute. It was seen as a possible national economic risk because Samsung's chips are tied to so many things, smartphones, servers, AI data centers, as well as global technology production.
Well, absolutely. And then tell us, Nemo, what that means for kind of the future of labor relations in South Korea, particularly this idea, as you say, that the government felt it had to get involved.
Right. So more broadly, this dispute, I feel, tells us that the AI boom will create labor conflicts as well as corporate profits. So workers making the chips that power AI want basically a bigger and clearer share of the gains. And I think this current dispute also shows how much Samsung itself has changed. It's a company once known for keeping unions very weak. Samsung has been known for its very strongly anti-union culture. And that company has now reached a last-minute deal, albeit a very last-minute one, with organized labor to avoid a major strike. And also the semiconductor industry may be very high-tech, but this situation tells us that its future still depends on very old questions such as wages, fairness at the workplace, bargaining power of unions, and who actually gets to benefit when a boom arrives.
Brand new technologies, age-old questions around salaries. Nemo Kim, journalist specializing in Asian issues in Seoul. Thank you very much for joining us. You're with Monocle Radio. Now, if you're looking for some sound of summer tracks to add to your playlist, well, our own musical curator, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, suggests you try the Franco-Brazilian duo PPJ, formed by Paula and Povoa. They just released a new EP called Joker. It's an eclectic mix of baile, funk, techno, and electro. While in Paris, Fernando caught up with the duo. Here's some of his interview.
I was born in Brazil, but I grew up in the north of France. And I was adopted when I was young by a French family. When I was 18, 19 years old, I started to do some research about my country. So I first traveled there to search my parents' origin and stuff when I was 20. And since then, I started to play music with a producer in Lille, telling all about my searches about this story. And I put all my little poems on electronic music because I grew up in north of France, like border with Belgium, where I first had my clubbing experience. And then I mixed my two worlds. And for me, it was so important to stay connected with Brazil because of that crazy story, me reconnected with my country. And since this first travel, I've never stopped about digging, searching, connecting with people, connecting with my biological family. So yeah, this is a big mix and big influences on the PPJ music.
I think that's very beautiful. And you know, I always have this theory, Paula, I don't know if Povoy you would agree with me, that I generally think Brazil and France, they have a very strong music admiration for each other. Because every time I come to Paris, I listen to a lot of Brazilian music. A lot of Brazilian artists come here, much more than in London, I would say. Mm. What was your relationship with Brazilian music before you start PPJ, before you met Paula?
Yeah, it's a whole world with its own music. It's his own thing. It's very specific and it's really, really fascinating. So I've always been curious about it, but Paula really enriched my knowledge about it.
You brought the electronic, like, because you know, you had your stuff, you also kind of, you're not just on PPJ, you also do some stuff solo as a producer.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really into club music, I would say, in all its forms. But yeah, with PPJ, we can mix together the Brazilian softness and beauty of Paula's voice and all her culture around it with the club music, because we like to celebrate in the club. So it goes really well together, you know, with the strange of the club music and the softness of that part.
And the new EP, it's a celebration. It's very carnivalesque. I mean, it's called Joker, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, Paolo, you can tell us a bit some of the songs. I mean, I wonder if we can start maybe with Cor. It's a bit bossa, it's a bit MPB, but then you go to the dance floor, you know, so it's quite innovative in that sense.
I love to listen to this music. It's so perfect for this new season, very sunny. We want to dance. I don't know, for me, it's like the summer tune. It can be dance in Brazil, it can be dance here in France, it can be dance in London, everywhere, all around the world. So yeah, it's we can imagine a Roda di Samba for my part. Povo is saying he started like wanted the bossa nova, but the only thing I can hear, it's like a Roda di Samba, a lot of musicians around the table with guitar, cavaquinho, quicker, but there's no quicker on it. But I can imagine the happiness, a lot of people around the table drinking caipirinha or very fresh frozen beer, and dancing, being happy, wearing only a little soft dress for a woman. And with the electronic music, it's such a great vibe. It's unexpected. We're starting with this guitar riff, and then it comes from this amazing electronic beat in the middle. So it's kind of perfect. And it was a collaboration with Chloé Caillé. We did it in the studio. It was really, really fun to do it. Really positive.
I was very inspired by this track I had learned on the guitar when I played the chord. Remember, we played it together a few times. Chega de Saudade.
Yes.
You know? So it's a bossa, right?
Beautiful.
Right.
Yes. It's all together. Bossa, a little bit of samba as well.
Yeah.
And I love, for example, I was huge. It was my first electronic movement. It was Electroclash. I was quite young when it came out. There's even a little bit of that in Joker, right?
Yeah.
Do you also liked kind of that period?
Yeah, for sure. But it's not that much on purpose, I would say.
People are saying we are Electroclash.
Yeah.
I knew this period when I was a young adult with Sexy Sushi, this kind of band. But yeah, it wasn't on purpose with PPJ.
The duo Paola and Povoa of PPJ there. Their latest EP, Joker, is out now. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
Coming up on 7:45 here in London, and it's time now for a roundup of aviation news. For that, we're joined from Phnom Penh in Cambodia by Matt Driscoll, editor of Asian Aviation magazine. Matt, great to have you on the show, and particularly because looking through your story list, you know, this is a tough time for a lot of airlines around the world. You bring us some good news, starting with Singapore Airlines.
Well, it's good news and it's bad news. I mean, there's never, in this world today, it's always a good news, bad news story. Yes, Singapore Airlines is adding some new routes, but they're also trimming routes in other places. I think Barcelona was one that I saw the other day, if we're going to be focusing on Europe a little bit. They're adding flights for Britain, as the story was talking about. But every airline around the world, not just in Asia, not just in Europe, but around the world, every airline is, and I hate the business jargon, but they're rationalizing all of their flights. So if they can add a plane here where they're picking up capacity, which you're seeing a lot of from Europe to Asia, a lot of times people would transit through the Middle East. I've got a son that's going to school at university in France. Normally, we would fly him through Dubai or Abu Dhabi to come back to Cambodia for vacations and things. But we said, no, we're going to put him on Singapore Airlines. It cost a little bit more, but all the airline tickets are up a little bit more. So yes, Singapore Airlines is expanding. They're adding flights. They're filling planes. But it's not quite the good news story that we would all like to see at this time.
Well, absolutely, because a lot of airlines are struggling and rationalizing, as you say. And linked to this, I found it interesting, Matt. This is also about kind of Singapore Airlines. Air India is one of these airlines that has struggled massively because of everything happening in the Gulf, but Singapore Airlines still has some room to back them.
Yes, and I mean, if you've got a partner like Singapore Airlines, that's great. It's one of it is always ranked either the number one or the number two airline. The problem is, and I've been to India many, many times. I started traveling to India in the 1990s. Since I've been editor of the magazine, I've been there in the last 10 years. I've probably been there 5 or 6 times. And I have flown Air India, and it is not an airline that I would like to fly. I didn't like it back then. I wouldn't fly it now. I would fly Singapore Airlines. Air India is a tough nut to crack, as we say. They've got a lot of things that they need to work on. They've had some safety issues. They've got a lot of other issues, leadership issues, things like that. But Singapore Air, I was talking to the Director General of the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines this morning. And, you know, Singapore Airlines, who he worked for at one point, you know, they are going to stick with their Air India investment. And again, as I said at the beginning, if you want a partner, Singapore Airlines is a good partner, but Singapore is not India and India is not Singapore. So that's a story that bears a lot of watching.
Well, it does bear watching, but interesting nonetheless that Singapore Airlines is involved if, as you say, Air India is an airline that is struggling. I mean, what does that say in general? Does a company like Singapore Airlines have an interest in the entire kind of Asian aviation sector staying afloat?
Yes, it does. I mean, and it's amazing to me, when I started editing the magazine 10 years ago, the one thing that struck me was yes, the airlines compete. Yes, airports compete. And they work really hard at putting out the best product that they can against their competitor. But when things happen like COVID or the war in Iran, you know, from the U.S. and Israel, when things like this happen, it's amazing how airlines will really come together, especially on things like maintenance, repair, overhaul. And, you know, someone is missing a tool from their shop, then they can borrow it and they take it back. You know, it's amazing. They do cooperate a lot. And having a partner like Singapore Air should give investors, should give other people confidence that Air India will get to where it needs to be. But I think it's going to be a long road ahead.
Well, finally, one more story from you, Matt, and this is related to the summit that we were talking about quite a lot on this show between President Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing last week. China has now finally confirmed a new Boeing order.
Finally, yes. And I feel like, for me, I mean, I am obviously, my accent, I'm American, but I'm no fan of you-know-who in the White House. But I think the Chinese, and I lived in Hong Kong for a while, I've dealt with China for a long time. I think the Chinese felt that they had to throw Trump a bone, you know, that he traveled all the way to China and went through a state dinner and all of that. They had to kind of throw him a bone, but it took days for China to confirm the order, and we still haven't heard anything from Boeing. So, yeah, it's very easy. It doesn't cost any money to say, sure, we'll order 200 planes, and then 6 months from now say, well, actually, Airbus has given us a better deal, or we're going to invest in Comac, our Chinese airplane, and those kinds of things. So what strikes me is the complete lack of details. What kind of planes? When are they going to be delivered? You know, things like that. None of that is out in public right now, and Boeing hasn't even commented. So is it a real order, or is China kind of dangling it out there to keep Trump from doing something on Taiwan or something else?
Well, definitely. And we have just maybe another minute, Matt, but tell us about COMAC then. I mean, how does that fit into this? Is the idea that China might want to support its own airline plane maker instead of Boeing?
COMAC is, it is what it is. It's a Chinese airline. It's a Chinese aircraft, but it's made with probably 75 to 80% of Western components. And I thought the one line from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce that was very interesting when they confirmed the statement that China was going to buy 200 Boeing planes, they said, and the U.S. has made, explicit guarantees for engines and components. Those are the biggest, which is basically 90% of the aircraft. So China can build a fuselage, China can build the wings, but the landing gear, the engines, the avionics, things like that make up the 90% of the airplane that's not a fuselage. China said that the U.S. has made explicit guarantees that those parts, those components, those engines will be supplied, because that's where China is weak. They can develop some of their own engine technology. They have some of their own avionic technology, especially in the military sphere, but not so much in the commercial sphere. So that was interesting to me. But the other lack of details is also interesting because, they could cancel it. I didn't see any papers signed, and nothing is final until you sign on the dotted line.
Well, absolutely. Matt Driscoll, editor of Asian Aviation magazine in Cambodia. Thank you very much for joining us. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Well, finally on today's show, to the world of fashion, where Blazy mania appears to have taken over. This being Mathieu Blazy, the new creative director of Chanel, who's created something of a craze that appears to be driving shoppers into stores. There are some new numbers to back this trend up, sort of, because Chanel returned to growth in 2025 after seeing a dip in sales and profits the year before. Well, I'm joined now by Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director. Natalie, great to have you on the show. Let's get into these growth numbers first of all. To what extent do we think that these were actually driven by Blazy himself?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Yes, I think it's a combination of factors, and overall it's extremely positive for Chanel and also for the luxury industry, which has had an overall slowdown, or at least a correction in the last few years after explosive growth post-COVID. So after a small dip of 4.3% in 2024, the Chanel house announced that there was 1.8% of revenue increase in 2025, and their revenues are now 19.3 billion. I would say that the momentum around Mathieu Blazy's appointment, he showed his first collection in September of 2025, definitely did contribute to this. And their CEO, Lina Nair, speaking in various interviews, did kind of think that this is the case. But there's also a much bigger strategy, I would say, there, where there was so much investment in retail, in specialist fragrance and beauty stores, specialist high jewelry stores. There was investment all across their category, a lot of also investment in their supply chains and in craft. So it's a 360 approach, and clearly it's working for the House of Chanel.
Well, it is working for them. And what do you expect then coming into this year? Because if 2025 was only partly based on Blazy, given that his products were not actually in stores, they are this year. So could 2026, could that momentum continue to grow?
Absolutely. I read one business journalist write that it's not a question of growth in 2026. It's a question of how much crazy the growth is going to be. which is great for the industry. And just looking at what, like you said, the Blasi mania and that phenomenon that we observed in boutiques around the world when the product launched, it's unlike anything else that we've seen in years, I think. I think there's been such a saturated market, product that has been quite generic over the last few years with that quiet luxury phenomenon, while now shoppers were really just lining up the boutiques, making requests, texting their friends what they're buying, and just really enjoying shopping again. And there was always like that word joy around his collections, because they're colorful, they're quite distinct designs. So definitely I think we're going to see even bigger growth. And aside from Blasi's refresh of the brand, again, there's even further development and investment in retail, especially across the Americans, which are driving the growth. So definitely I would say 2026 will be even more positive.
Well, Natalie, we just have another 30 seconds or a minute or so, but aside from the Americas, Chanel is now also even talking about opening more stores in China. Just a word on that. Does Blasi's reach extend that far?
China has been a tricky market for the luxury industry the last few years, and in their 2025 results, it just looks about like it's stabilizing, and that growth and interest is coming back. Definitely, I think Blasi's collection has kind of caught the attention of the market, and I think that's the moment probably, especially with the right retail investment and client experiences, that we could see recovery.
Blasi mania around the world. Natalie Theodosi, Monocle's fashion director, thank you very much for joining us. That is all the time we have for today's program. Thanks to our producers, Angelica Jobson, Laura Kramer, and Desiree Bandley in Zurich. Our researcher, Josefina Gomez. Ryuma Takahashi in Tokyo as well. Our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance by Jack Jewers. After the headlines, there is more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday here in London. I'll be your host for that. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. Emma Nelson back for that one. I'm Chris Chermak. Thanks for listening.